Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the Tell Me More podcast. It's exciting. If you're listening to this, it sounds the same. But if you're watching, it looks different, and that's because we're in a new studio space, which is awesome. I'm loving this. It's beautiful and comfortable. I got this nice big chair. And we've been off for a couple of weeks. Part of it was I was off for a few weeks, and part of it was we were updating this studio space, and I'm excited to be here. I got Blake with me today.
Hey, good to be here.
Yeah, so if you don't know Blake, he's a spiritual formation pastor. What do we call you?
Sounds good.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Bible guy.
Hey, Bible guy.
COTM Bible guy. And excited to be talking. We're going to try to cover, I thought, Blake, we might just try to get into kind of talking through sort of the last 2 weekends of sermon. We didn't cover last weekend, the one on, what was it? The end of chapter 4, basically, the speech, two different commands of speech against another, and presumptuous speech. And then we could talk about this weekend too. They're similar. At least I preached them similarly, even though the commands are pretty different in kind of different sections. I thought we could maybe jump into all of that.
That sounds good. I had an opening question for you because the last two sermons, even though they were different, this is nothing big or surprising. But you spent quite a bit of time in both sermons on the front end.
Yeah.
Unpacking a principle before diving into the text. And I have also felt that to be necessary in some teaching environments. Like, you're going to get to specifics, but also it's really important for our people to understand bigger principles that apply beyond just the text at hand. They apply throughout the scripture. So I was curious if you could take us through that thought process. What led you to think, all right, I need to unpack a principle here before we get into the text?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really, honestly, appreciate you asking. And I was talking with my brother Gabe about it. He recognized that too. And being obviously, we're us in kind of the teaching profession. You notice these things. What I don't want to do is spend all of my time just being prescriptive about specific issues. Like, okay, so this week we're going to talk about not talking bad again about somebody. Because what that does is it kind of, it roots our faith in like a do this and don't do that, which is just kind of like, it's more than that. Mm-hmm. The gospel is more than that. And these letters are more than that. They're not, these letters originally are going to be read as a whole. And so the theological aspects of them, which I think are the most important parts, like who is God? And even looking at James' arguments and considering what he's saying or why he's, like his reasons, his logic for why he says, don't speak evil against a brother or sister. And then he gives these reasons that would be really easy to pass over and just make the commands of Scripture. And in fact, I find that a lot of preaching, I've done it myself so much, it just becomes pragmatic. Yeah. Like, it's not useful to talk bad, or it's a bad idea to do that. Yeah. But and so really what you're left with when you walk out of the, sanctuary is, okay, try to do better with this.
So it's possible, I was thinking about this with my kids. There's a way for my kids to technically keep all of the rules and still tick me off. Like, knowing the rules and keeping the rules is good, but I think, at least what I find in the scriptures, is that they're meant to guide you into the heart of God, to understand why he would give you these rules.
Yes.
And so it's like, yeah, sure, kids, I want you to follow the rules, but there's a reason why I'm giving these. There's a principle behind it. It made me think about, I flipped to Exodus 20 as you're talking about this, because it has the most famous do's and don'ts of all time, with the Ten Commandments. Yep. And what comes at the very start of the chapter is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. It's the first thing he says. Yes. Before he gives any commandments, he roots it in who he is and what he's done for them.
That's so, yes. And that's the thing, is I think it's a recipe for a dead faith to just present the scripture as a list of rules. There are plenty of rules, but those rules are downstream from the reality, the bigger reality of who God is. And James is certainly, like, that's exactly how, this is how Paul writes. Of course, James and Paul write in really different ways, and John different yet again, but they're all the same in this regard, that they're rooting it in the reality, or the reality of who God is, like acknowledging God as God. And that's where James, each of these commands, everything that he's saying, it's all pointed back to who is God, and then who are you?
Yeah.
And when you violate that, God as God, you end up putting yourself in a place you're not meant to be.
Right.
And that ultimately is sin.
Right. So you talked about that. We've slept several times
Yes.
since 2 weeks ago, but 2 weeks ago you covered chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. Do you mind if I read 11 and 12 first? So this was about speech, slander. So he's talking to us about speech ethics.
Right.
Is a phrase we've used in our content meetings, which he's hit on several points in this letter. It's not just this part that he's talked about the tongue. So chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. This is the CSB translation. He says, "Don't criticize one another, brothers and sisters. Anyone who defames or judges a fellow believer defames and judges the law.
Yeah.
If you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" I sense a little sarcasm in there from James.
Oh, yeah.
So he's talking about us taking this position. And you talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that if one finds oneself speaking down to a brother or sister, that means that you have first taken a position over them.
That's and more than that. So James is concerned with you criticizing a brother or sister in Christ and how you might position yourself over them. But immediately he doesn't spend much time with that idea. He's not trying to paint it as man, look at how bad this is. Like you're making yourself out to be so superior to them. That's like who, and that would certainly be like a modern take, wouldn't it? I mean, we kind of think like, who are you to sort of put yourself above another person? But that's not what he says. He's like, he takes it immediately to the law of God, and you can see his logic. It is when you judge a brother, you're actually standing in judgment over the law. How is that? Well, because it was the law that said, love your neighbor as yourself. So when you actively violate the law, it is as if you're saying, well, that doesn't matter. I know better. God may command that I should love my neighbor as myself, but actually what's needed here is criticism. What's needed here is judgment. He wants me to forgive.
Right.
No, I think that what they need is criticism. And when you do that, James' immediate next logic is you've set yourself up as a judge, not just over the law, but over the one who gave the law. Right. And this is not, I mean, this is his same argument around partiality, that you're forgetting yourself. You're getting way ahead of yourself. You've pulled yourself out of the position that you belong in, and you've positioned yourself over not only God's law, but God himself. And then he concludes with this biting question: Who are you to judge your neighbor? It's like you've forgotten yourself.
Yeah.
Get back in the place that you belong, which would be humility.
Right.
Yeah.
So implicit here, he doesn't say it, but I think he's wanting us to track with the idea that this seat is only reserved for one person.
Yes.
It's just interesting.
Yes.
He doesn't go there.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's easy to read this, like what you're saying, it's easy to read it just as the prescriptive and miss who he's saying belongs in that judgment seat alone.
So, and here's okay, so let's talk about this for a second, because I think this is so good, because if I just make it around don't speak evil against a brother, and we talk about 4 reasons why speaking evil against a brother is bad, or how, it hurts people, and you position yourself over that, whatever, all these things that maybe kind of sound real practical and typical that you hear in sermons from time to time, maybe a lot. The trouble I see with that is that I now become the arbiter of what is and what is not speaking evil. My idea of what it is to speak evil against a brother, it could be varied.
And it could change for you, season by season.
Exactly. So it's like that doesn't seem. It kind of feels good, but it seems like it leads real quickly to a dead end. But what I found myself wrestling with just personally as I've been thinking about this, and I've had lots of opportunities here where stuff happens around me, or I see behaviors in people that I'm near that bother me or that I think might be wrong. I am being a lot more careful now about how, and what I'm realizing is, because the way that James is framing this argument is it's positional. I'm stepping into a kind of, I don't know, crossing a boundary that doesn't belong to me. It's like I'm in a courtroom attempting to go up and sit in the judge's seat when I'm not the judge.
Yeah,
it's so presumptuous.
It's not a love seat. Like it's not made for two people.
Right. And so I find myself going, I don't belong there.
Yeah.
I've got to leave that to the Lord to judge. In other words, it becomes a lot clearer for me what it is to speak evil is to get beyond myself and to take up a position of judgment against another person that is not mine to take. So I got to leave that to the Lord.
This is interesting. I preached 3 weekends ago and did the passage right before chapter 4. And he talks about, in verse 6, he quotes from Proverbs, God resists the proud,
right,
but gives grace to the humble. And then the first imperative that he gives after that is submit to God. So there's this idea that the proud person imagines themselves above God.
Yeah,
and to first submit, I mean, means to bring everything underneath him, to remove yourself from this place above God and coming underneath him.
Yes, this would be the meekness of wisdom that James is describing in chapter 3:13. The meekness of wisdom so the idea of meekness is to submit, to be submissive, not to be weak or passive is the right word because it means you're in the kind of posture of one who's receiving, but not passive in the sense that you're unwilling to act or sort of afraid of doing anything, but rather you're in this position of subservience. You recognize you're not the final authority, like a child making sure, checking in with mom and dad, is it okay before I whatever? You want to know their wishes or their perspective on something. I think that's the idea. I think that's exactly what the Lord means when he talks about having like a childlike faith or becoming like a child is putting yourself in the position of one who's under a greater authority.
Right. And I think to unpack that further, it is putting yourself underneath, and that includes every part of your life. So imagining all of, we don't like to tell people to compartmentalize their lives, but to imagine compartmentalizing your life for a moment. You got a box for your money, box for your relationships, a box for your speech. It is so easy for the human psyche to bring most of those things to God. And imagine if I bring most or even 99%, I am submitted to God.
Wow.
But I think the scriptures would say that a 99% submitted life to God is still an unsubmitted life. Like if there is, and as he's going through this letter, I see him kind of pointing at these different boxes.
So let's talk about
bring these to the Lord.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So what then would you say to the believer because we're all, I guess, wouldn't we all say that we're in a spot where it's like, there's areas of my life that the Lord doesn't have total control over, right? I'm there, you're there, I'm sure. So does that mean I'm just not submitted to God? How would you describe that to a person?
So I think about, I'm going to use your words against you.
Okay, come on.
So do you remember the sermon a few weeks ago? You said, you gave the analogy of a windshield.
Yeah.
You put a crack in the windshield. That crack will not stay just there. It will spider.
Yes.
It will splinter. And so what I would say to that person is, what if this has made its way like a virus more into your body and your life with Christ than you think? Mm-hmm. And of course, we're not going to be perfect.
No,
but that is James's exhortation at the very beginning, so that we may be complete, perfect, lacking in nothing. And so I think he's like his brother in the Sermon on the Mount, he's raising the bar to a place that a lot of us don't think is possible with Christ. But James is saying, no, it is. And it starts with submission. It's not about keeping 100 rules. It's about submitting yourself to God in all areas of life.
I think it's a posture where, when the Lord brings these things, James has been this for me.
Yeah.
As I've taught through this, the Lord has brought many things to my attention. I would say, that's how it works. If I'm, if you're that person that you're thinking, okay, where am I in my, walk with the Lord right now? We're all in different points in our journey. I think about the Lord calling his disciples, that begins with a call to come and see, ends with a call to come and die. In other words, the kind of heat of discipleship, like turning up the heat on a stove. The more and the further they go with him, the more he asks of them. And I think that's a good way to think of it. Yes, I'm with you in this sense. I think you could say that harboring a kind of aspect of your life that's unsubmitted, yes, does splinter, fracture, spread, and that's a really dangerous place to be. But also, from the other side of it, you should expect that as you're walking with the Lord, He's going to gently lead you into places where He's going to say,
100%.
now give me this.
Yep.
Trust me with this. I felt it like I said, this whole series, I keep encountering the bit about anger, the bit about words. I've been really thoughtful, like really trying to bring before the Lord my words in a much, much greater way than I ever have done before. I've been praying Psalm 19:14 a lot more. Let the words of my lips and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you. Just today, I mean, I'm really careful about like my posture toward people on the road. How, like, what words do I allow coming out of my mouth? How do I talk about players on my favorite football teams when they screw up? I mean, just yelling at the TV or whatever. You idiot! You know, come on, catch the ball. Whatever. It's like how, like I'm thinking about all of that. That's all due to James, and I think that's the Lord in this using His word here to confront and convict. And I think I have a responsibility to do something with it when it's brought to my attention.
Yeah.
That's how I would think of it, is as the Lord, the Holy Spirit brings these things to your attention, you have an opportunity to do something with it. And I think the dangerous place is when you don't.
Yeah.
When it's brought before you and you don't. Is God merciful? Will He continue to work with you? Yeah, but I think there's a certain point where your heart just gets hard, callous, and
I was
stops.
thinking the same thing. And at that point, you enter a state of being deceived, and it's really hard.
Yes.
Not impossible, but it's like Pharaoh, opportunity after opportunity.
Yeah,
And
wow.
I've heard Gary Bashir say, grace will either harden some people or soften others.
Boy, that's
so
true.
Grace is extended, got liberally. The sower sows seed. The gospel is preached, grace is extended, and that can either harden you or soften you. And so my hope and prayer for our people has been that slowly but surely maybe some hardened hearts have been softened.
Yeah.
Starting with one little area, and like a beachhead, God has, through His word, through James, made His way into the hearts of our people.
That's really, really good. So this is kind of connected back to the idea, we haven't really unpacked it yet, but the idea of wisdom, which I've spent a lot of time talking about the last couple of weeks. For me, I see it as a continual theme through James. Honestly, I see it as it is the perspective of the Scriptures, which is seeing things God's way. God has a different perspective. He has a different perspective on Abram than Abram has for himself. You're a father of many nations. Wait a minute, what? Me and Sarai can't have any children. Yet God sees something different, and their job is to kind of come up under God's perspective and accept what He says about them, which ultimately they do. But that is the story of the Scriptures all throughout, is God has said this is how things are, and man kind of continually either fights against God, rejects what God says, or aligns himself with what God says.
So it's like, so the Hebrew idea for wisdom is, I'm going to clear my throat here. Hopefully the mic can stand it, but chokmah.
Okay.
Like that's the Hebrew word for wisdom. And in Proverbs 8, it talks about how God, almost like He wove wisdom into the very fabric of creation.
Yeah.
Lady wisdom gets talked about in the book of Proverbs. And so the wise person is one who lives, and you talked about it the past couple of weeks, but the wise person is one who lives in accordance with that.
Yes.
Who goes with the grain. If you're thinking about a piece of wood, goes with the grain that God has made. And I've heard it said, you go against the grain of the universe, you're going to get splinters.
Yeah.
And so I see James just like, hey, go with the way, go with the grain that God has designed the universe.
Yeah. So there's two key principles. We talked about them the last 2 weeks that are, to me, there are the principles that lead us into kind of what James is talking about here, the most helpful way of understanding it. And I got it from this Gospel Way Catechism book. Here you go. Gospel Way Catechism. Great book. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've been working through it just slowly with my daughters on the way to school. It's 50 truths that take on the world. It's like questions and answers. Question 7, why did God create the world? Question 26, who is Jesus of Nazareth? And there are answers to all of these that are they're meant to frame
and for people
how
that
you think.
have never heard that word catechism, it's not a new idea at all. It's a very, very ancient idea. Somebody who was entering the church, they were called a catechumen. They were somebody that was going through a catechism class.
Right.
Maybe people that grew up in a denomination that's more liturgical or traditional, they've heard it. But for some of our non-denominational folks, it's like, oh, what's this? It's a very ancient idea.
And it's helpful.
Yeah.
It's a way of, because I think what we can all recognize is that it's been really hard for Christians, especially evangelical Christians, to transfer our faith from one generation to the next. And we're seeing a lot of young people leave the church. Fortunately, now we're seeing many return. But yeah, how do we install faith in the next generation? It's not just for the next generation, but it's for anybody who wants to be a Christian. But it's a helpful way of doing that. And it's done through questions and answers. So the first question, which I thought was so good, is what is the center and point of everything? And we spent a lot of time talking about this week before last, that God is the center and point of everything. I think it's something like, by him or in him, all things came to be and are held together. He has no rival, something like this. And I spent quite a bit of time just sort of helping people see that everything, if you're a Christian, things begin with God. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a drift kind of in, especially what I might call popular Christianity, toward, of course, an acknowledgement of Jesus, even a worship of Jesus, but a very subtle decentering of God and a centering of ourselves under the heading of being helpful, practical, relevant.
Becoming who God made you to be.
Yeah.
Which is it's such a tricky phrase.
I even used it to some degree this weekend, but it has to be framed in the idea that you're meant to become like Christ, which is the idea of being mature and complete and perfect. It's not the idea of you becoming who you think you should be, who you even dream of being or desire to be, but who God destined you to be, which is to be like him. Be holy as I am holy. Anyway, but it is starting with God, which is this, I think, foundational pillar to, it is the idea of wisdom. I have to begin with God's perspective. So I must be really careful not to import my ideas of right, wrong, good, evil into anything, with whether it's money, how I might treat a neighbor, how I would talk about anybody. I have to, and there may be some things, here's the thing, it's like, because we live in a world, let's say, that was shaped deeply by Christian thought and perspective for a long time, there's still some echoes and vestiges of Christian thinking that permeate our broader culture. And so some of our ideas about life align up pretty good with the Bible. Others of our ideas interestingly have their roots in Christian thinking, but have gone off the rails a long time ago, and have they've left the reservation, if you will. And so we have to kind of get back to this idea of, okay, who is God and what does he say about things? So we have to start with him. Yeah.
And some have called this like a big God theology.
Yes.
You can have a theology of humanity, you can have a theology of creation, you can have a theology of what God has done for us.
Yeah.
But starting first with who is God, that's the starting place of everything.
Let's talk about that for a second. So big God theology, how would you unpack that for someone? How would you help them understand it?
This is a view of God that would see him not just as the center of everything, but also before anything was created. So for me, it begins in the doctrine of the Trinity.
Okay.
Like this God existed before Genesis 1:1.
Yeah.
And because if you don't start there, that God existed, and he was, I'm going to use some big words here, but eternally satisfied in and of himself,
sure,
then creation will be seen as something that he needed in order to be happy.
Yes.
And that he needs us in order to be happy.
Yes.
And I've heard people teach this, that God was either bored, and so that's why he created what he created, or he was lonely. And so he needed some friends. He needed to create us. And so in a way, we become, even though God created us, we become the center. Yeah. And the news is better than that. God didn't need anything, but he chose out of the overflowing love that he had within himself really to important. Create us. And so all of this begins in a God who is satisfied in and of himself, even if he had never created us.
So what we have a lot of within the kind of American church is sort of like only child theology, wherein we become God's treasured creation. All
true.
True.
All true.
But it tends to decenter God and make it about us. And so, and what ends up happening is we end up kind of Christianizing or attempting to Christianize sort of cultural ideas about self-esteem, about enoughness, about, like loving yourself and learning how to forgive yourself and all these things that are just wildly unbiblical, even in the language of here's a practical example this weekend that as I'm trying to kind of because even our very worship practices frame this. So what are the songs that we sing within church? How do we sing them? What are the words of these songs? Not just are they biblically true, but who does it platform? Who does it put at the center? Right. Are we really singing about God, or are we singing about us? I was exposed recently. I heard a song in a church where it was like, I draw a boundary line around my family. I don't know what this song is. The blood of Jesus, rules and reigns here. Satan has no place. And I was just like, this isn't, I don't even know what this is. Like, this isn't, for me, it wasn't a worship song. It was like a prophetic declaration of you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, my family, the devil's got no place here. Take your hands off my family. We're protected. I'm like, I don't even know. Like, this, it didn't qualify as worship.
Sure,
to me.
Maybe a time and a place to pray that.
Maybe.
But in terms of worship,
Yeah.
I heard John Tyson talking about this one time. I think somebody was maybe critiquing some of the worship that they had, songs.
Yeah.
And his point he said to them was, it's not about you. Like, this is not for you.
Yes.
Worship is not for you.
Yes.
It is for God.
Yes.
This is unto Him.
Yes.
Regardless of how we feel, regardless of our taste and preferences.
Which, interestingly, is the best thing for you.
Yeah, and if there was ever a category of the human life where we decentered God, and this is to segue into what James says next, I think it's around making plans. And so it's just, I've always found this passage interesting. This is, again, from a couple of weeks ago, but when he says in verses 13 through 17, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So it is a sin to know the good and yet not do it." I grew up in a church culture, we've talked about this, where that phrase, if the Lord wills, was added virtually onto everything we would say. So even things that you knew God wanted to give you or wanted to do, it still felt like this necessary posture of humility. Like, God would be mad at me if I didn't add on, if the Lord wills. So that could potentially be one ditch, that you're saying it around everything, and there's zero knowledge of who you are in Christ. You don't know what God has done for you and what He wants for you.
Right.
But the other ditch that I think James is addressing, that is more prevalent, I think, in the American church culture, is I never say it at all. I know what God is willing. I know what God is planning, and therefore...
Or I just assume that God is for me. So if you envision your life that God is coming alongside of you, instead of this fundamentally different posture which shows up and says, God, Lord, what do you want?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to move until you tell me which way I should go, right? That's a fundamentally different thing.
Yeah.
So you're just assuming that God, I lived like this for a long time. So God's desire, He just loves me so much. He is so for me. He wants to see me successful and blessed and healthy and just doing great. And I thought I knew what that meant, like what healthy, successful, all these things, blessed meant. And so I just assumed that God's job was to make sure all of that stuff happened for me. And when I felt like I was being opposed or things weren't working out, I could turn and say, Lord, help me out here. What's going on? I need help or whatever. And He, yes, of course, you're my child. I want to come alongside. But there was no humility, no bowing before Him, no, He was centering around me. It was the way I thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting is that, like, making plans is not evil.
No.
And yet James says that if you do this and you never factor in the Lord, he calls it evil.
Yeah. All such boasting is evil. This idea to presume that well, again, because it is this interestingly the same principle, but who are you to judge your neighbor? Again, you've forgotten yourself. You've forgotten who you are. I think that's why he takes the time to remind you who you are. I spent a bit of time thinking about yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. So think about the ignorance and arrogance of someone who says, well, tomorrow we're going to do this and we're going to be there for a year. You have no idea what tomorrow will bring. You have absolutely no clue. You are so limited in your capacity to control the future that it is absolutely ridiculous that you would presume to think you know how the next year is going to go.
I think about early March 2020, like how many people had how many people I knew, my family, they had plans to go travel wherever and ever. And just over the years since then, how many people I've talked to have just said, had to cancel that trip. I think out of the many opportunities that season was, one could have been an opportunity to remember this. Like, we have no idea.
Well, in a situation like that, really, really shows you how little control you have. And how quickly things can pivot and shift and never be the same again. Anybody that's been through tragedy or a really difficult, you've gotten that phone call that changed your life. Everything was different on the other side of that. Like, that's part of what's so tricky about those seasons is that they do remind you of how little control you actually have. And it's not to sort of live like the bottom could drop out at any moment, sort of, kind of worrying that the worst could always happen. That's not the idea. But it's making plans to the best of your ability in light of what God has said, who he is, and where you currently believe he's leading you, but open-handed, knowing that this could all change. And if that should happen, I'll still trust you.
Yeah. And I think some people would see adding a statement like Lord willing or if the Lord wills as a form of doubt.
Yes.
I think some people would say that's why I'm not going to say it. But it's like we covered earlier in this series, that's not the doubt that James talks about when he speaks of doubt. When he talks about doubt, he's talking about the divided heart. Somebody who's torn between serving God and serving something else. And here, this is a person that is serving God.
Yes.
That is making these plans unto him, keeping him in mind through God as the filter. Like, this is not a statement of doubt. It's a statement of lordship.
So it would be the equivalent of like you're working for someone and they've given you a command of what they want you to do. And you have a task. And let's say you're doing it. And you've been performing that task and you say to yourself, I'm going to do this tomorrow. Well, this would be the next step in, whatever task that you have. But that's all boss willing.
Yeah.
The boss could come in at any point and say, we're going to take you over here.
Yep.
Great. That's where I'm going to go. Like, that's the opposite of doubt. It's actually humility. And I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it would be faith. I'll go wherever you lead. I'm going to do this for now because that's the last thing you told me to do, and I'm going to faithfully fulfill that task.
So it doesn't mean if
directive.
I say, Lord willing, I'm thinking about my impending death, and that death is the only way this isn't going to happen.
Yeah, right.
This could mean God will change things.
Yes.
He could reroute me to a different
prerogative.
thing. Yeah.
He's God. I'm not. So, Lord willing, we're going to build this. Yeah. We have done. We've been building this expansion, this lobby expansion onto the front of the building. We've been, when we had plans, and as we started moving forward in those plans, certain doors shut, different doors open. You follow the Lord through all of that, not holding on to. I think, in fact, the opposite of what we think of. It's funny, like we think of faith as this unwavering, unbudging confidence in a certain outcome, but
we think it's certainty.
Yeah.
And certainty is not the same thing as trust.
Right. That's right. So certainty is, that's a great way of putting it. It's like a lot of times people think that faith is certainty in a specific outcome. Yeah. But faith is not certainty in a specific outcome. It's certainty or trust in a person, in a word, in who God is, no matter what. This is what you find in the book of Daniel when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go before Nebuchadnezzar, and they say, our God is able and he will deliver us from this fiery furnace. But if not, even if he doesn't, we still won't bow down and worship you. The idea is that, look, they had they believed that the Lord was going to save them. But for them, even if he didn't save them, even if they were burned alive in this furnace, it wasn't going to change the fact that they weren't going to bow to Nebuchadnezzar. No matter what you threaten us with, there's nothing that can convince us that you're worth worshiping here over Yahweh. So our trust is in him, whatever he chooses to do. They had confidence that he would save them, but they left it. Really, it's very much like if the Lord wills. Their confidence was in him. I think that's powerful. I really think that's powerful to say, I think this is what the Lord is going to do, and I believe this is what he's told me. But even if he doesn't, or if it comes out a different way, it won't change my confidence in him.
I heard a story about Mother Teresa one time, a man that approached her and said, will you pray that I get this job? And she said, I will pray that you trust God.
Yeah, that's right.
Just this immediate
because
reversal.
Why assume that God's will is that you get that job? It will change the way that you pray when you start thinking like this, because you stop assuming that you know what's best for your life. So what you can do, this can look like, is, Lord, this opportunity is in front of me. Maybe it looks like this. There's this job, and Lord, I really like this job, and by all accounts, it sure seems like it would be a great fit for me. I'm going to ask you, give me favor in getting this job. But if it's not your will, if you have something else for me, I also trust you with that. That's what James is talking about when he says, if the Lord wills. It's like, this could go either way. I trust you in either direction.
So I just was thinking, this is not a fruit of the Spirit, but the word adaptability came to mind. That a mature Christian is adaptable. I think about angry, cranky Christians. They don't adapt well. In their mind, they've got an idea of how things are going to work out.
And
this leads to anger. And I think about a mature Christian as one who is able to adapt.
I'm in your hands, Lord. I'm in your hands, and I trust you. Even when it doesn't make sense, or when I can't figure out what's going on or why, nothing can shake my confidence in your goodness toward me. I agree. And you do find when Christians particularly, I think it's so interesting because how people view faith so often is through this rigid outcome. It will be this. The only outcome is this. And then when that outcome doesn't come to pass, it wrecks some people.
Right. And I think that's where we'll eventually cover it in chapter 5 whenever James talks about the prayer of faith. Because I do think there is a spiritual gift of faith that is about, it's God energizing somebody to believe for something specific.
Correct.
But we assume that we can just use that like a credit card whenever we want.
Yes.
And that's not how the gift is even talked about in the New Testament.
That it's a right, this is the key, that it is a right that I have. Not a mercy or a grace that is given. If it's a right, then I can make a draw or a demand on it whenever I choose. However,
and again, it places a human at the center.
Correct. I am the one who gets to dictate whether or not, in this case, healing takes place because I'm exercising my right. Depends on how you view it. Is healing a right that I have that I can lay claim to, or is it a grace that is given on the basis of God's?
It's for a different Tell Me More episode.
That's a fun conversation.
But this is good. All of this is around the principle of God being at the center.
Right.
So humans not being a million miles away from God because he doesn't care about us, but it's just that we orbit around him and not the other way around.
Yes.
So that leads to this past weekend. You talked about another principle, and would you mind reading the second? Because it was about the second question in that book, right?
The second question has to do. It draws out the first question, which is, how do we see God and come to know Him? So we begin with God. And if we assume that it's true that God is the center and point of everything, then the next logical step would be, well, then who is this God, and how would we come to know who He is? And the answer is, we see God by the light of His revelation. This is so huge. Not by our imagination. God reveals His character and purposes through His word and works. So this gets into the theological concepts of general and special revelation. I talked a little bit about the pretty easy concepts.
Sure.
General revelation being God's general reality. There is a God. Start there. And you could even infer some of his goodness through creation. Psalm 19 is a place I would direct you that actually works from, it's pretty cool. Psalm 19 works from general revelation about who God is to special revelation, God revealed in his law, his word. But then even as you go further than that, there's personal revelation of God now revealing things to you about you, which has to do with, in Psalm 19, it's
unintentional sin.
Unintentional sin, stuff I didn't even know I was doing. It's like,
terrifying.
Yeah. So, but it's a really interesting progression. I don't have time to get into it this weekend, but I thought that was a cool progression there. So you start with general revelation, God revealed in creation. I can look at the sky. I can look at the beauty of creation and say, there must be a God. But that's not enough to know the specifics of his character.
Right.
You wouldn't
That'll
know,
get somebody started on a journey.
Yeah.
Woo them, compel them to keep moving towards him.
That's right.
But I agree with you.
But it's not enough to know him intimately. This is why for anyone that might say, nature is my church or whatever, it's like, okay, I mean, yes, like you could, I think, sense the presence of God in creation, no doubt about it. But apart from the scripture, the trees can only, there's only so much. It's pretty limited what they can tell you.
Yeah.
And so scripture starts to give us his divine attributes and character.
Eventually pointing us to Jesus, which you could call, it's like a concentric circles. General revelation, moving to special, and then Jesus at the center.
At the very center. But the only way we know anything about Jesus is through the scripture.
Yep.
So we need God's word to tell us the specifics of who God is and what he thinks about things. Now, this matters because when you are talking about specific issues or, like money, which James is talking about here, I think it's important. I didn't have any time to talk really about this, but I inferred it, it's there, but James is not just making something up here. He's drawing on a long tradition of how God thinks about economic injustice, going all the way back to the original Torah, how God thinks about things. And he's using that to then, and then not only that, but honestly, his own brother's teaching, the Lord's teaching around money, things that he said. And I do believe that James is, well, there's no doubt. I mean, it's spirit-inspired speech here, but also it feels very prophetic.
Yeah. In the content meeting, we were talking about how this is this seems apocalyptic, very similar to John in Revelation, to where multiple times John is quote unquote in the spirit.
Yeah,
and so he's caught up,
Yeah.
and he's to see an earthly reality from God's perspective.
Yeah.
Because you cannot do that on your own. It's like we cannot get this revelation on our own, and we need God to apocalypse us, to show us how this place really is, because our culture is weaving the story in such a way for our imaginations to see it according to culture. And that's why you need the prophets to come in and bring God's perspective.
To show you how things really are. So the example that I gave this weekend is the scene from Avengers Infinity War. Do you know this scene? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So I don't even remember, some group of the Avengers lands on Titan, and it's this like thriving metropolis of flying, cars and people all over the place, and it looks beautiful. And then like a curtain gets pulled back, and it's just a wasteland. And of course, it's Thanos has been there. He's already been there, and he's already destroyed the planet, taken half of whatever his intention was, to kind of wipe out half of all life, so that
So to have the reality stone is to have the ability to deceive.
Yes.
And I think about the power of the enemy. He's called Prince of the Power of the Air. He's called the deceiver.
Yeah,
riches
that's the idea.
are called deceitful. Like he is weaving together a lie. He's putting up a mirage.
Yes.
And he's like through worldly systems, and this is how the world, the flesh, and the devil all work together.
So good.
And so he's weaving together these lies that the world normalizes.
Correct.
That our flesh wants.
So that's exactly right. And that to me is what James is doing, is stripping all of that away.
Come now.
It's like, let me show you. Let me show you what's really going on here. Revelation works in much the same way. You'll read Revelation a whole lot more clearly, if you understand it to be James showing these early Christians it looks like Rome is thriving. It looks like the emperor is God.
And it looks like you are suffering and you are at the very bottom.
Yes, but let me tell you where you really are. Yeah. Let me show you who's really on the throne. Let me show you what's really going on. There's a different reality at play here, a deeper, as C.S. Lewis would call it, a deeper magic. Yep. And so that's what James is doing, is pulling back the curtain on this lie that we
need
bought
God's
into.
help to see it.
Absolutely.
Because our physical eyes are not telling the same story that God's eyes are telling. They just aren't.
Well, man looks on the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. So there's this idea that we tend to get focused on the immediate, the temporal, the things that don't last. We get distracted by things that are unimportant. Yeah. And so what the scriptures continually do is call us back to, point us to what really matters. Yeah. And because we get lost in all of this. So James, it is a denunciation, and I think if you wanted to relate, and you can, I think you should, we'll do this next weekend, but relate verses 1 through 6 to verses 7 through 12, where in verses 1 through 6, he's talking to the ungodly rich. It is a prophetic denunciation in front of the congregation, as if to say, if you could imagine, like right now, I don't even know the situation in Nigeria. I'm hearing that Christians are really suffering there. So you can imagine how these Christians might feel. They're not in power, they're being persecuted, they're being hunted, they're being killed. And as if a prophet steps into their midst and prophesies a word against their oppressors to them, as not as a, their oppressors might not ever hear it, but it would be encouraging to the Christian to be reminded of, to hear what the future fate of these oppressors is, right? That's what he's doing. So they're hearing this and they would take encouragement because they're being oppressed by these rich landlords who have acquired wealth, property, and they're using their wealth to essentially bully people into doing their will and advantaging themselves. Yeah. That's what's happening over and over and over again. Yeah. And these poor Christians are suffering because of it. Perhaps they don't have food. Perhaps it sounds like they're even dying as a result of this. They're being murdered is the way that it's being described here. So it's a really ugly thing that's going on, and James is prophesying, if you will, against them. Yep. In a really strong, biting kind of way.
Yep. And I think one of the encouragements is that the cry has reached. I love how James calls him the Lord of Armies. Yeah. He could have called him anything there. Yeah. And he called him the Lord of Armies. That's who this cry is.
There's a justice here. Yes. This reminds me of Revelation 7, where all of those that have been martyred are under the throne, or they're at the base of the throne crying out, how long? Yeah. How long? And he says, just a little while longer. It's interesting that the next passage is going to be patient. Yeah. It's justice is coming. Right. Justice delayed is not justice denied in God's eyes. Yep. God will work. He is just being slow right now, or not slow, but patient. He is not judging people just yet. Yeah. There is a day coming when he will. You're going to get this day of the Lord language that follows all of this. That's the judges at the door, all of this. Yeah.
So why do you think he chooses to use apocalyptic imagery and words around money? He could have used it around words. He could have used it around other topics in his letter. It's just interesting the shift in tone and style when he moves into talking about money. I have a thought, but I'm just curious.
I think my best guess would be, I'm curious what you'd say. My best guess would be because I think money has a way of deceiving so completely that it's going to take something jarring for us to see it for what it really is. Yep. It is so, the allure of money, and I'm not just talking about greedy, but what money can provide. Yeah. That money can give me this self-satisfied life in the here and now that really diverts me from what I'm meant to be living for. That there is this jarring language that's meant to wake us up. I think it's important to note that money is not bad, and the scriptures never describe money itself as bad, but they do describe it a lot in negative
I know,
terms.
because I've heard people, typically Americans, that will say, money's neutral.
Yeah.
It's a tool. And I think that
It
is
leans
true,
bad.
but that can be naive.
Yeah.
Because if you look at all of Jesus' teachings on money, which some people think as around like a quarter maybe of all of his teachings have something to do with money.
Yeah.
When it comes to the parables, even more.
Yeah, true.
But the weight of it is it's a warning.
So how would you think, to the person that, I think of it like this, how do you think about alcohol?
Right.
Especially if you grew up in a Christian home where alcohol was like bad, like I did.
Yeah.
Maybe you can't make the case that all drinking is sinful, but I think a lot of Christians would say, yeah, but it leads to something bad pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And money's similar.
Yeah. And I think the reason why we're warned is because we still got flesh.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
As sanctified as I might be, I still have flesh
You
that
have
is
to be
prone
really
to
careful.
wander, that
Absolutely.
is prone to seek security and satisfaction in places other than the Lord.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why I so appreciate the word deceit around riches. Whenever Jesus says the deceitfulness of wealth. In other words, wealth can lie.
Yeah.
And it does lie. It lies about somebody who's putting off an appearance.
Yeah.
You have no idea if they went into debt for that appearance, which is becoming a very popular lifestyle in America, to go into debt in order to keep up appearances. They have been deceived, and they are deceiving other people.
Wow.
So you end up desiring what other people have when they aren't even affording what they have.
It's interesting, but James words fall into a similar category for James. A lot of what he says he says nothing positive about the tongue. There's not anything. He does not say that the tongue can be used to really encourage and build up. He says nothing about it. Proverbs does. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. But James is just like, that's a fire. It destroys. It's set on fire by hell. He's being extreme for the sake of getting your attention. Like Jesus when he says, if you don't hate your father and mother, you're not worthy of me. He's not meaning you should hate your parents. He's using extreme language, which is common in that day. He's using hyperbole to make a point. But let's not miss the point, and let's not dismiss the hyperbole altogether as simply hyperbole and say, he doesn't mean that. But to recognize that for James, the temptation of money is so thorough, so strong, that he just only talks about it in negative terms. Right. You should be so aware of this because you will and can easily fall prey to it.
So this section just is continuing to remind me, and I'm thinking about 1 through 11 here of chapter 5. It continues to remind me of Revelation, to where there's this dual message of comforting the faithful Christians, but waking up the sleepy ones.
Yes.
And you see both of these at play in this passage, to where if a rich Christian has been lulled to sleep by their wealth, James here is sounding the alarm. By speaking of the judgment that's coming on the ungodly rich, there's an implicit warning here to the godly rich of, I better be on guard. I can't trust this.
The line about you have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter, and J. Mateer's line about only the thin cow is safe when the butcher shows up. And that's wow. I mean, that's a striking image. James pulls no punches with these words. When you really stop and consider what he's saying, they are. I don't even know I don't know if vicious is the right word. They're biting. So strong. And
I think he wrote in such a way, and this is what Jesus did with the parables. And I think this is a trait of good teaching. It's like a little morsel that lodges itself in your brain that you cannot get rid of. And like leaven, it continues to grow, and it starts to make you just can't forget these images.
There's no quarter. There's no softness in it whatsoever in which you can retreat into and take any comfort from it. It's so strongly negative and harsh that it's convicting all the way through. I found myself, Heather and I have already talked about this, and I don't know what to do with it. But I find myself teaching it this weekend, just thinking, I will be held to a stricter judgment. I'm declaring this. What am I going to do with this? How does this affect my spending habits? Dear Lord. And it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable.
It is. Yeah, I think just to continue to kind of double click on this money idea. In Jesus' day, they believe mammon was a god, was a real spiritual being that was at play and influencing the way that culture worked. And the longer I lived, I was in the business world for a period of time, but then the more I read, the more I observe, this world, and specifically America, really does operate based off of financial incentives. Like people will move in the direction of money. I read a book called Empire of Pain. It's about the Sackler family who developed the OxyContin drug.
Oh man, yeah.
And there was a show.
I watched.
Did you watch the Michael?
Well, there are two different dramatizations of that story.
And
yes.
I just the whole thing.
It's awful.
Was disturbing because it's not just this family that's developing. Like it's a trickle down effect with the sales reps, with the doctors. Everybody is willing to turn a blind eye in order to make some money.
Isn't that wild?
Pornography industry.
Yes.
If people stopped making money, that industry would stop.
Wow.
Sports gambling, like all of these industries develop, and it's not necessarily about the product. It's about money.
So let's talk about this for a second, Blake. Yeah. This is good. So what then does this say to Christians?
Yeah.
I mean, this certainly has to affect like what line of work you into. What are you selling?
Right.
Just because you can make a living on it doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
I said it this weekend. Just because it's legal doesn't make it moral.
Yep.
I think the line about you have withheld the wages of these workers. In other words, when you are doing business in such a way that it advantages you to the detriment of the people that you're in business with, watch out.
Yep. You gave that example of your house cleaner. I'm reading a book called Scandal of the Kingdom right now, which is a Dallas Willard book that was published after he passed away on the parables. And he's talking about money. And just this morning, I was reading about an example he gave of a factory owner. This was, I think, in the 90s. And he had like 2,000 employees.
Yeah.
Factory burned down a few weeks before Christmas. He decided to continue paying these workers as the factory was being rebuilt. Wow. So they're producing nothing.
Yeah.
And yet he's in the exact opposite situation as the owners are in verses 1-6 of chapter 5, that I'm going to be held accountable for how they are treated.
Yeah.
And I think in our culture, this goes back to the idea of me being at the center. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to continue doing that.
I didn't tell that story, and I only told it on the Saturday night service, and that's not the one that went out this weekend. So for those that are wondering what Blake's talking about with the house cleaner. So Heather and I, we have had a house cleaner or different house cleaners over the years. And we don't have one now because we've had a lot of construction going on at our house. Had some bathrooms that had to be remodeled because they had shower pan leaks and stuff like that. A lot of fun. But our practice has been, not always, but in the last few years has been that when we, like on weeks when we're traveling and we don't need the housekeeper to come, that we would just pay them anyway because that's their living. And it's easy for us to say, we'll go on vacation or we don't need you this week. And we're pretty last minute. We're not like super plan ahead kind of folks. So we just realize like when we take a vacation and they don't, like that's money out of their pocket. And we're not obligated to do that, but I feel like it's the right thing to do because this is, I think like our lives affect their livelihood. And so I just think making our decisions in a way that takes into account the people that we do business with matters.
Yep.
And I think thinking that through, I think if you're doing business with someone, extracting every bit of money out of them, trying to get the absolute best deal you can for yourself might be good business practice. Right. It might not be good Christian business practice.
It might be what Gary Vee told you to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing. But it's not about getting as much as you can for yourself, but doing right by the people that you're.
I think another thing here for Christians, you asked that question. What line of work are you in? I think another thing is having a theology of stewardship.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is what we believe, that there is one owner of everything, and it is not us. So again, connected to that principle of God at the center.
That's right.
We are not. But here's how I think even that, we say we are stewards of our money, but when your imagination sees your name on everything that you own, on your bank statements, on your checks, on your credit card, the deed to your home, the title to your car.
Yeah.
We can be deceived into thinking that we are the owner, especially if we tithe. So this is where I see it play out, and I notice it in my own heart.
Oof, yeah.
The 10%, that's God's.
But everything
I give it
else
to Him.
belongs to
the
me.
90%,
why can't I do what I want with it?
And I think the Christian imagination is
belongs to Him.
God owns the 10% and He owns the 90%.
Yeah, He does.
So He's not just, He doesn't just take the 10% and that's His, but the 90%, I am going to be subject to what He says about it.
Oof.
So recently, my grandma passed away earlier this spring. She was 96, and she had some money left over in her checking account for her grandkids, and so she gave us some. It wasn't like $1 million, but it wasn't nothing.
Yeah.
And the moment that we got that money, like, you cannot control what your imagination does.
Of course.
It just runs
We
wild.
could do this. We could do this. We could do
And
this.
that's what I would want to tell people is the goal isn't to get that to stop completely. You can't. That's going to happen until Jesus comes back. But I think the sooner you go to God, who owns it, the better.
Wow.
If you just say, Lord, this is yours, and of course, tithing off of stuff like this is
I think
a
it's a
nice
great practice. Absolutely.
But then also, like, every decision, I would rather err on going to God too much for spending than not enough at all.
Yeah.
Because some people could say, oh, this is kind of cheesy, corny. Am I really going to ask God if I should buy this $6 latte?
But I think when there is income coming in, Lord, this is yours.
Yep.
And I offer it to you. Do with it what you will. I mean, I think, Lord, this is your house. I think there are dedications that can be done. Lord, this place belongs to you. We have this home because it's a gift from you. Even just recognizing, I think this is where worship comes in, but recognizing that what you have belongs to the Lord. I think for me, one of the things that really stood out in the passage this weekend, and it really came from the tears, this idea of spending money in a way that spending money isn't bad, but it does lead to a life without self-denial.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see is it's so easy in our day and age to live, like I think about how much human activity is centered around making stuff that we can then go buy. I mean, manufacturing is so, like, we can make stuff that we didn't used to be able to make. You have to go back like a couple hundred years ago. There's like, what could you buy? There had to be a whole lot less.
And then the whole other growing industry of advertising, which is getting you to want to buy the things that we used to not make.
So basically you get this tree of the knowledge of good and evil thing taking place in your life all the time, which is I see it, I desire it, I take it, I consume it.
Yep.
And
then you go hide it in a storage unit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, oh man, how often are we doing this?
Yeah.
Just buying stuff. I don't want to prohibit. I don't think the scriptures are prohibiting buying anything. But man, there's such a pattern of, and when you read Paul's words, I've learned to be content in whatever situation I'm in.
So I think learning to sit with desire and not do anything about it.
Wow, that's good.
We're terrible at that.
Yeah,
and so
that's
Sydney and
good.
I will do that. I mean, I think it's good practice. You and your spouse or friends set a number, a limit. $100 or $200, $500. If something's over that amount, I'm going to wait a week to act on this. Like if you just decided now, because if you try to make those decisions in the moment, you're going to justify it so easy.
Oh yeah.
But say like, all right, anything over $300, I'm going to talk to this friend about it, my wife about it, and I'm going to wait a week. I wonder how many purchases wouldn't happen. And not only that, but by the end of the week, you notice, you know what? I don't want that as much as I thought I did.
I just wanted it in the moment.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So theology of stewardship. Another thing that I was thinking about this weekend too. Christians always go against the spirit of the age. Any thriving community of Jesus is always acting in a way that is like perpendicular to the way that culture is going. And if culture right now is all about impulse spending, I was thinking about the practice of like impulse giving, impulse generosity. Just
that's good.
If culture is shaping our imagination to be ready to buy at the drop of an Instagram ad, then what would it look like to see the world through the eyes of God, who is a giver?
Wow.
Who is the giving God? And that's what James, so earlier in the letter, he says, ask God for wisdom, who is the giving God.
Yeah.
Generous.
Yeah.
And that's the God that we
every
image.
good and perfect gift comes from above, down from the Father of lights. Yeah.
So what an opportunity we have to be. Now, this can, if you aren't on the same page with your spouse, they find out you gave $5,000 one month just because you felt like being like God. That might not go over well, but I just wonder what that would do to the heart Jesus says it's better to give than to receive.
Yeah.
And what if we actually started to put that into practice and experience the joy of Jesus in that way?
Yeah, so good.